My brother told me I was worthless at Thanksgiving dinner, in front of the whole family. 6 weeks later, I was standing in his company. He said it so casually, like it was just a fact everyone already knew. She's basically worthless compared to what I do. What none of them knew, Di, what I never told a single person in my family, Di, was that the tool half of his company depended on every single day. Then the CEO said my name here, my real name phone, into that microphone in front of 400 people, including my... For 6 years, I let my family believe I was the disappointment. Tonight, in front of everyone, I finally got to tell the truth about who I really am.
My brother called me worthless at Thanksgiving dinner, in front of our entire family, and the worst part wasn't even what he said. The worst part was that nobody at that table disagreed with him. If you've ever been the quiet one in a family that only had room to celebrate one child's success, if you've ever swallowed your own worth just to keep the peace at a dinner table, I think this story is going to sit with you. And if it does, I'd be so grateful if you'd hit like and subscribe before we start, because there's a lot more where this came from. Let's begin. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I'm 29 years old. I grew up in a house where achievement was currency, and my older brother Ryan had always been rich in it. Ryan is 34, sharp-jawed, effortlessly charming, the kind of person who walks into a room and immediately becomes its center of gravity. He went to a good business school on a partial scholarship our parents never let anyone forget, climbed the corporate ladder with terrifying efficiency, and by 32 had landed a senior product director role at Solara Technologies, one of the fastest-growing software companies on the West Coast. Our parents talked about him the way other families talk about lottery winners, with a kind of stunned, grateful pride, as if his success was proof that all their sacrifices had finally paid off. I took a different path, and in my family, different was never neutral. It was always, quietly, a disappointment. I studied computer science, but instead of chasing a prestigious corporate track like Ryan, I gravitated toward back-end infrastructure and open-source development, unglamorous, invisible work that almost nobody outside the industry understands or notices. After college, I took a modest-paying job at a small, struggling startup, and in my spare time, almost obsessively, I built and maintained an open-source authentication and data syncing library that developers across the industry had quietly started relying on. I published it under a username, KestrelDev, that had nothing to do with my real name, mostly because early in my career I'd been talked over and dismissed in enough developer forums as a woman with an opinion about back-end architecture that anonymity simply felt safer. Over 4 years, KestrelDev's library, something I called Fenwick after our childhood cat, quietly became a foundational piece of infrastructure inside hundreds of companies. I never told my family about any of it. To them, I was just Sarah who does something with computers, a phrase my mother used so often it had practically become my full legal name at family gatherings. Thanksgiving that year was hosted at my parents' house, the same house I grew up in, with the same slightly too small dining table that somehow fit 12 people every year through sheer force of habit. Ryan had just closed a major product launch at Solara, and the entire dinner orbited around it before we'd even finished passing the mashed potatoes. My father asked him detailed questions about strategy and headcount. My mother beamed the way she always did when Ryan spoke, nodding along even to the parts she clearly didn't understand. I sat there mostly in silence, the way I usually did, offering a polite laugh at the right moments, until my Aunt Carol, trying to be kind in that particular way relatives sometimes are, turned to me and asked, "And Sarah, honey, how's your little computer job going?" Before I could answer, Ryan laughed, not cruelly, exactly, but with the easy carelessness of someone who has never once considered that his words might actually land somewhere. "Sarah's job is basically maintenance work," he said, gesturing vaguely with his fork. "No offense, Sar, but you're kind of the definition of replaceable. I mean, compared to what I do, running product for a company with 400 employees, you're..." He paused, searching for the word with the casual cruelty of someone who thought he was being funny. Honestly, you're kind of worthless in the grand scheme of things, not in like a mean way, just, facts. The table laughed, not maliciously, just the easy, reflexive laugh of people who'd absorbed a family narrative so completely that the punchline required no defense from anyone, including me. My mother said, "Ryan," in the mildly scolding tone she used for minor manners violations, like using the wrong fork, not for the kind of thing that actually needed correcting. My father said nothing at all. I laughed too, a small, practiced sound I'd perfected over years of these dinners, and changed the subject to the pumpkin pie. I drove home that night with my hands too tight on the steering wheel, replaying the word worthless on a loop until it lost all meaning and somehow gained more at the same time. I didn't cry, not right away. I got home, sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and pulled up the Fenwick repository. 41,000 stars, 300 contributors, downloaded by companies with names my brother would recognize instantly if he ever saw the dependency list of the software he used every single day at work. I sat there in the blue glow of my monitor and let myself, for the first time in years, feel the full weight of the gap between what my family believed about me and what was actually true. And then quietly I cried anyway. I want to be honest about something here. I don't think Ryan is a villain. I think he genuinely didn't know what he was saying carried weight. Because nobody had ever taught him that words landing on someone who'd been quiet her whole life might land harder, not softer, than words landing on someone used to being seen. But knowing that didn't make Thanksgiving hurt less. It just meant I had nowhere obvious to put the hurt. 6 weeks later, in mid-December, Ryan called me, which was unusual enough on its own that I almost didn't answer. "Hey, so Solara's doing our big annual holiday gala next Friday," he said, breezy as always. "Mom and Dad are coming as my plus ones, but I've got an extra ticket and Dad's back is bothering him, so you want to come? Free food, open bar, you can see where I actually work." I almost said no. Then some small, curious, self-protective part of me said yes, mostly because I wanted to see, with my own eyes, the machine my brother had built his entire identity around. The Solara Gala was held in the company's headquarters, a glass-walled atrium downtown that had clearly been designed by someone who wanted every visitor to feel slightly smaller than the architecture. String lights hung in careful asymmetric patterns across the ceiling. A jazz quartet played near the bar. 400 employees and their families mingled in expensive-looking evening wear, and Ryan moved through the crowd like he'd been born into it, introducing me to colleagues as, "My sister, she does something with computers." The same reflexive dismissal my mother had trained into all of us. I was standing near the edge of the room, nursing a drink I wasn't really drinking, half listening to Ryan describe his product launch to a small cluster of admiring coworkers, when I noticed something on a large screen mounted near the stage, a scrolling slideshow of 2020. 6 engineering highlights, cycling through screenshots of internal tools and dashboards. And there, in one slide, half covered by a stock photo of a server room, was a screenshot of an admin panel with a small, unmistakable logo in the corner, a stylized bird in flight. Fenwick's logo. My logo. Before I could fully process what I was looking at, the jazz quartet stopped, the room's ambient noise dropped, and a woman I recognized from company press photos stepped up onto the small stage near the microphone. Elizabeth Hart, Solara's CEO, a composed, sharp-eyed woman in an elegant navy suit who had built the company from 11 employees to nearly 400 over 9 years. She gave a brief, warm speech thanking the team for the year, and then she said something that made my stomach drop straight through the floor. "Before we wrap up tonight, I want to do something I've been hoping to do for over a year," Elizabeth said, scanning the crowd with the particular focus of someone about to say something unscripted. Our entire authentication and data infrastructure, the system that quite literally keeps this company's product running every single day, is built on an open-source library called Fenwick. It's maintained almost entirely single-handedly by a developer who goes by the username KestrelDev. I've tried for over a year to track this person down to properly thank them, and about 2 hours ago, our head of engineering finally cross-referenced a commit history with a name on tonight's guest list. She paused, and I felt Ryan go very still beside me. "Sarah Mitchell, I believe you're here tonight as Ryan's sister. Would you mind coming up?" I don't fully remember walking to that stage. I remember the sound of my own heartbeat louder than the murmur of 400 confused, curious guests. I remember Ryan's face beside me, drained of color, his mouth slightly open, looking at me like he was seeing a stranger wearing his sister's face. I remember my mother's hand flying to her chest somewhere in the crowd. Elizabeth Hart handed me the microphone with a warm, genuine smile, entirely unaware of the specific gravity of the moment she'd just created inside my family. "I have to ask," she said, turning to face me directly, "because our engineering team has debated this internally for months. The sharded caching layer you built into Fenwick's sync protocol, the one that somehow handles conflict resolution without a central lock server. How did you solve that? Because our own senior architects couldn't figure out how you'd done it without introducing race conditions." It was, on its surface, a technical question, but it was also, I understood in that moment, the exact right question. The kind of question only someone who had actually read the code deeply and carefully would ever think to ask. It wasn't a softball. It wasn't a formality. It was a real, specific, expert question that could only be answered by the person who had actually built the thing, and everyone in that room who understood anything about software could tell the difference immediately. I answered it. My voice shook for the first sentence, and then, somewhere in the middle of explaining the versioned vector clock approach I'd spent 8 months developing alone in my apartment after work, something steadied in me. I heard myself explaining, clearly and confidently, a piece of architecture I had built completely from scratch, to a room full of engineers who worked for a 400-person company that depended on it every single day, including my own brother, who stood frozen at the edge of the stage the entire time. When I finished, the applause wasn't polite. It was real, sustained, the kind of applause that surprises the person receiving it. Elizabeth Hart shook my hand and said, loud enough for the nearby crowd to hear, "Sarah, I don't know if you're happy where you are right now, but if you ever want to come build infrastructure here properly, with real resources behind you, my door is open. What you did alone, in your spare time, is more architecturally sound than most funded engineering teams manage with 20 people." I found Ryan afterward near the bar, still holding a drink he hadn't touched, staring at me with an expression I'd genuinely never seen on his face before. Not pride, not yet. Just a kind of stunned recalibration, like someone recounting a math problem they'd been certain they'd solved correctly. "That was you," he said, not quite a question. "The whole time, Fenwick. That's Sarah. That's what our entire auth system runs on. I've heard engineers talk about KestrelDev like some kind of legend. That's been you this whole time." "Yeah," I said. "That's been me this whole time." He was quiet for a long moment, turning his glass slowly in his hand. "I called you worthless 6 weeks ago," he said finally, his voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. "At Thanksgiving, in front of everyone. And you just sat there and let me say it. I've been sitting there and letting everyone say some version of that my whole life," I told him, and I felt something loosen in my chest as I said it out loud, finally, to the person it needed saying to most. It was just easier than explaining something none of you ever asked me about. We talked for almost an hour after that, longer and more honestly than we'd talked in years. Ryan apologized, not the quick, deflecting kind of apology he usually gave, but something slower and more uncomfortable. For him, the kind that required actually sitting with what he'd done, rather than rushing past it. He asked me real questions about Fenwick, about the years of unpaid work, about why I'd never told the family any of it. I told him the truth, that somewhere along the way, I'd stopped expecting them to be capable of being proud of something they didn't understand, so I'd simply stopped offering it to them. My parents found us near the end of the night, and my mother, still visibly shaken from watching a CEO publicly praise the daughter she'd spent years describing as doing something with computers, pulled me into a hug that lasted a beat longer than any hug I could remember from her. "I didn't know," she kept saying quietly into my shoulder. "Sarah, I didn't know." "I know you didn't," I said. "I never told you." That admission mattered more than I expected it to in the weeks that followed. It would have been easy to make this only about what my family had gotten wrong about me, but the more honest truth was more complicated than that. I had built an entire hidden identity, brilliant and thriving, specifically because it felt safer than risking being dismissed inside my own home. Ryan's cruelty at that dinner table wasn't the only wound in this story. My own long habit of hiding, of shrinking myself down to a size my family found easy to overlook, was a wound too, one I'd need to keep working on long after that gala ended. I didn't take Elizabeth Hart's job offer, not immediately, though I did eventually leave my old startup for a senior infrastructure role at a company that finally paid me something close to what my work was actually worth, and where Fenwick became, officially, part of my job description instead of a secret I kept in the dark hours after work. Ryan and I talk more now than we have since childhood. He still works at Solara. And there's something quietly, persistently funny about the fact that every single day, the product he's built his career around runs on architecture his own sister designed alone at a kitchen table he never once asked to see. At Christmas that year, at the same too-small dining table, my Aunt Carol asked me again how my little computer job was going. Before I could answer, Ryan set down his fork and said, loud enough for the whole table to hear, "Actually, Aunt Carol, my sister built the entire authentication system my 400-person company runs on. Solo. In her spare time. Our CEO tried to recruit her personally." The table went quiet in a completely different way than it had 6 weeks earlier. Not the easy quiet of a joke everyone already agreed with, but the surprised, recalibrating quiet of a family finally being handed a truth they'd never bothered to ask for. If there's one thing I hope you take from this story, it's this. The people who love us don't always see us clearly, not because we aren't worth seeing, but because we sometimes make ourselves small and quiet enough that seeing us clearly requires almost no effort at all from anyone else. I spent years being worthless in my family shorthand, not because it was true, but because I never gave them a reason strong enough to reconsider it, and they never thought to ask. It took a stranger, a CEO who had actually read my code, to ask the one question my own family never had. And in asking it, she gave me back something I hadn't realized I'd been missing my whole life. The simple experience of being seen accurately by someone who had actually paid attention. Wherever you are, whatever quiet, invisible thing you've built that nobody in your life has bothered to ask you about, I hope you find your own version of that one question, the one that finally makes someone look closer. And if this story meant something to you, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel, because there are so many more stories like this one still waiting to be told, and I'd love for you to be here for the next one.